Do you feel frustrated when people don't listen to you? Almost like this?
He never fucking listens. Never listens, Lizzie! What do I have to do to make people fucking listen to me?
Well, I've been there before, so I think I can help. If everywhere you go smells like shit, maybe you should start checking your shoes. If you run into a dickhead in the morning, you ran into a dickhead. But if you run into dickheads every day, maybe you're the dickhead. And I don't mean to start the video by calling you a dickhead, that's not what I mean. But what I do mean is, if no one is listening to you, perhaps it is time to check yourself. Perhaps you're the reason why people aren't listening to you. You're the common factor. I'm now in a position in my life where most people listen to me most of the time, and I'm super grateful for this, and I believe I've worked for it. But also the reason why I say most people most of the time is I now realize that it's not that they're not listening to you on purpose, or that they're ignoring you on purpose, or that they don't want to be friends with you anymore. A lot of the times it's just that they're having a bad day, or that they're dreaming, or literally they just didn't hear me. But it wasn't always like this. No, in fact, I'd actually argue that I was the most quiet kid in my old school. I could go an entire day without saying a single word. I'd spend a lot of breaks at school in the toilets just scrolling on my phone, and that was not a satisfying lifestyle, because at the time I also had this mind that was just bullying me. My mind was so negative, there was so much self-criticism, so much self-doubt that, let me use the example where your friend doesn't nod at you. Back then, just a few years ago, I would actually think that my friend doesn't like me anymore, and actually just start analyzing for the rest of the day what I did wrong for them to not like me. And so without further ado, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, rapid fire questions, that you don't have to answer immediately. You just have to relate to either one or two of them. And if you do, this video will help you a lot. And I can't remember the questions off my head because it's like what, 10 of them? So I'm literally just gonna read directly from my script there. Do they care? Obviously they don't care, like literally they don't care because they aren't listening to you, right? But does it relate to them in any way? Does it help them in any way? Is it about their life? Is it about someone gossiping about them? Because that's the thing that gets attention, right? About them. People only care about themselves. Do you believe what you're saying has value? Does it provide value? Does what you're saying even need a response? Put yourselves in the other person's shoes, the one that's supposed to be listening, and just imagine yourself talking to yourself. Would you even need a response? Did they perhaps not hear you? Are you difficult to listen to? Do you stutter a lot with ums and ahs and filler words, and maybe that's boring people? And so, if you related to any of that, let's jump into the first thing we have to fix.
Do you want to listen and see if my spirit can use a phone? Have you ever heard a death rattle before?
Time and time again, I've experienced ums and ahs to be the fastest way to bore someone. Because when you say and ah, it dilutes a message that's supposed to be like, 5 seconds long into a message that takes a whole fucking minute with the ums and ahs.
Eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death, and he's destroying Medicare.
But it's not really your fault that you have the ums and ahs and stutters, and we'll cover how to get rid of this very easily and simply in a moment. But fundamentally, why you do filler words or ums and ahs is because you want the person to keep on listening, right? You don't want them to just go away or interrupt you during your silence. Or what if I told you silence is one of the greatest tools towards getting someone's attention, especially if you use it in the right time? This is how every TED talker or someone giving a speech speaks, and people listen attentively. So how do you go ahead and get rid of your ums and ahs? Well, there's this phrase from, I actually can't pronounce his name, it's like Vin Gang, and instead of getting rid of your ums and ahs, which is what everyone else says, he says replace your and ahs with silence. And so you do this very simply by consciously throughout your day, whenever you're speaking, be aware of when you're prone to say the ums and ahs, and when you catch yourself about to say the ums and ahs, just replace it with silence. And not only will you have more time to think of what you actually want to say, you'll put your audience into a trance of suspense, especially if you do it correctly. And how you do it correctly is by pausing in the middle of the sentence as opposed to the end of it. So let's say you're going to say, I don't think that's a good idea, and then you're going to say a bunch of other shit. The mistake most people make is, I don't think that's a good idea, and then they pause it there. But what that does is leave you out in the open, and people can interrupt you because they think that you've finished your sentence. What you want to do is try to pause during the middle of a sentence. So for example, I don't think, like that, in the middle of a sentence. Or you can pause after you say and. So I don't think that's a good idea, and like that. When you're trying to consciously change your ums and ahs into silence, it will be a little bit hard at first. But after a few days, it will become second nature, as it has happened to me.
You know, just because I'm gonna rest a little bit, yeah? You know, once when I was starting out my gym journey, I was doing like the bar, it was all shaky, and then like a couple months ahead, I started getting good, yeah? I started trying like 50 with the bar, and then because I was in like a really small and shitty gym at the time, there was this random transgender that came up to me. Yeah, I think she was working there. Yeah. And she literally said, if you can't do 50, if I can't do 50, you can't do 50.
Is that your motivator?
What the fuck?
And I also want to note that it's completely fine to say a filler word here and there. In fact, that will make you more like a normal human being instead of just being in a TED Talk 24/7 in your life. Now, speaking of boring someone, none of these tips that I've just told you about will make much of a difference if you don't talk to the right people. If you still hang out and talk to the people that don't appreciate you, on the same wavelength, don't have the same interests as you, of which the next chapter will help you.
Dylan! You son of a bitch!
A lot of the times when you're trying to talk to someone, it's about your interests, things you relate to. That's really how you befriend someone, isn't it? But I feel like a lot of people, and this was the case with me, hang out with a group that they're just kind of bundled with in a classroom, that they sort of go together with, and it's always a little bit lukewarm. You're never like really brothers with any of your friends. You can't really relate to them on a really deep level, and this is the case with many people that are on self-improvement. So, you know, like cold showers, reading, working on a business, those types of people, and I'm one of them. And it's very hard to relate to the normal person that's still on video games, still on TikTok, still on Netflix. And hanging out with people that don't necessarily relate to you or have interests the same as you, it has a lot more negatives than you actually think, because the friendships will be like hi and bye, and by the time you go to another school or another college, more than likely fade away. You won't be hitting like 5 a.m. workouts with a guy that has your same interests. You won't be meeting up for a guitar playing session. You like guitar and you have a friend that likes guitar. You won't have that if you have a lukewarm friendship group. So how do you get friends that are more like you? How do you get friends that are more relatable to you? Very simply, it is by saying your truth. And this might sound vague at first, just saying your truth. And so I'll make it a little bit more specific for you. Whenever you're next in your classroom, the teacher asks you a question that isn't just yes or no. You have to give a creative answer to the question.
What number comes between 2 and 4, Beetlejuice?
25.
And this helps if you're in a class that is very open to discussion. Maybe something like psychology. That's a subject I do, and that's probably one of the best subjects to discuss things. If you want to say something, just say it. And that sounds very simple at first. You may be scared of people rejecting you and finding your ideas repulsive or whatever. But then I'd say to you again, do you want a lukewarm hi and bye relationship with the friends around you? Or do you want to find the people that love you, but also risk some haters? Because I do admit, if you are unfiltered and if you do speak your mind and heart, you will find haters. For example, in my psychology class, we were talking about stress and hormones. It came to the discussion where we were talking about stress, and it was my turn to speak. And so when I said stress was an entirely good thing, if you view it as a good thing, because although it makes you feel like shit, it also makes you sharper. It also makes you do things faster. For example, if you have stress before a deadline, you have to hand in an assignment, don't you work faster? Or maybe you're about to enter a fight with someone in a ring. That stress and anxiety beforehand It's powerful. And by saying what I thought on my heart, instead of going along with the crowd like, oh, stress is really bad, guys, we should take more baths, that got all of the dudes in the room, every single dude in the room was agreeing on with me. They were like, yeah, that's kind of right, actually. He might be right. But then the girls in the room, and especially the ones that were, how do I say this without sounding rude, a little bit more victim-minded. Nothing wrong with that. Probably not even their fault that they have a victim mindset. But they were like, no, stress is really bad. Oh, my parents get stomach ulcers from stress. And I'm sure maybe they do, maybe they don't. I've never had that experience, so this is the worldview I have. Another thing I'd say, aside from just speaking a truth, is find places where your people would be. So if you like to play guitar, join a band. Or maybe let's say you're a very, very disciplined guy. Let's say you're a very ambitious and motivational guy. What do you think would be the right place to join? Perhaps a gym, perhaps a boxing gym, perhaps a martial arts club. But now you know the secrets on how to get a friendship group that you're truly proud of. Or what if I told you most people still, even though you are practically blood brothers, they're still caught in their own head, and we humans are inherently selfish, and all we care about is ourselves. And truly the only way to get someone to listen with 100% of their brain is what I cover in the next chapter.
And welcome to Stratton Oakmont.
Thanks, man. I'm gonna have a beer. It's fun.
And I want to start this chapter off with a story with me and my friend in the gym. And we were talking about how a lot of male influencers started smoking cigars alongside, Andrew Tate, alongside Iman Gaji. And as we got deeper and deeper into the conversation, we asked each other, would we ever smoke cigars in the future? I said I'd probably try cigars when I was early 20s, like 25, 23, 24, around there I would try cigars. And he kind of rejected the idea of that. He kind of didn't like that I was gonna try cigars at like early 20s and that was bad for my lungs or my throat. And he's got a point. But then as soon as I flipped the conversation over to one of the things he said, which was, if I had a friend that was really knowledgeable about cigars, like a connoisseur, then he'd actually try cigars with that friend. And so using his own words, I convinced him to listen in depth. And I also convinced him that it was a good idea for me to get into cigars, because then I could be the connoisseur that knows about cigars. And so that would benefit him. But what is the concrete lesson here? What am I trying to tell you with this story? People care about themselves more. This is like copywriting 101. If you were to ever sell a product, you know that it's your job to sell the dream to the customer. Because the only way you can get the customer's attention in the midst of thousands of posts is by talking to their pain points, is by talking to them, is by talking to their dreams. This is the same when you're talking to people. Does what you're saying relate to them? Does what you're saying interest them? And to prove this fact that we all only care about ourselves, if there was a massive famine in China or a war-torn country, a lot of people been killed, but then you have a tiny toothache or a headache, what would you give a shit more about? Your problem, right? Your own headache, your own toothache. And also, who is the first person that you look for in a group photograph? Yourself, right? And so a pro tip here, or something you can do so that you can action the philosophy in this chapter, would be to listen to the other person. But that's something to think about, right? If you want people to listen to you, do you listen to other people? But another thing could be also being genuinely interested in someone. I know it might be a little bit difficult at first if I tell you to become genuinely interested in someone and that someone you're talking to is talking about solar panels. If he's a tech nerd and there's lots of details and he wants to tell you about the details about coding or something that's boring. In which case you could do something that I've found helpful myself, which is try to link their interests to your interests. So I'm really interested in how people earn money, how people live their lives, what people's ambitions are. And so for the solar panel guy, maybe I'd ask him, oh, how much does that save per year? Is that more than just having normal electricity that runs to your house? Would it even be possible to have a solar panel on a Tesla? So that's how you become genuinely interested. Try to link your interests to that. So now you've gotten all of the ways to get people's attention. But what if you're in a group? Or maybe it's your classroom, or maybe you're giving a presentation and you don't want people splintering off into little conversations of their own, and then this table sees that table's splintering off into their own conversations, and this table's going into their own conversation, and then the teacher has to hush everyone to listen back to you again. So how do you captivate your audience and not just an individual? This leads me to chapter 4.
Like if you're speaking in front of a group, you are not delivering a talk to a group. That's not what you're doing. The talk isn't a packaged thing that you present to a group. There isn't a group. There's a bunch of individuals.
That sounds a little bit stupid at first, but think about it this way. Imagine you've just been stabbed and you're bleeding out on the floor and there's bystanders standing all around in a circle, and you expect that they're going to call the ambulance, right? But guess what the bystanders are thinking? Oh, someone else is going to call the ambulance as well. Oh, he's probably going to call the ambulance. Oh, that guy's on his phone. He's probably calling the ambulance. And that goes around the circle. And then you bleed out to death because no one has called the fucking ambulance. Okay, maybe that's a little bit of an exaggerated example, but I'm pretty sure that example has been in a study somewhere about how everyone doesn't want to get involved and how you have to call out the person for them to do something. So let's say you're stabbed again. The way you get help is by saying, hey, you in a red scarf. Hey, you in the blue jumper. Hey, you with the jeans. Call an ambulance. Because as soon as you do that, they'll feel responsible, and they'll also feel the crowd around them hearing that they've been called to do something, and so they feel the pressure, so they do it. Whereas if you say, someone help me, people are generally more resistant to help that person. Think about it in the classroom scenario as well. Think about if you have a very, very boring lesson with a very boring teacher and a boring subject, and the teacher says what the teacher says. Who wants to answer this question? And guess what? If you've ever been in school, guess what happens? No one puts their hands up. So what does this force the teacher to do? Pick on people. And so once the teacher picks on people, they have to answer. Unless, of course, they go with the classical route with, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. And then, they get away with it or they don't. How does this relate to anything I'm saying? Well, I find that the reason why people splinter off into their own conversations or get lost or start daydreaming is that they don't feel included in the conversation, almost like they're in spectator mode, not in the actual game. So how can you apply this when you're talking to a group, when you're in a group of friends, when you're in the classroom, when you're doing a presentation? The best thing you can do to keep everyone's attention in a group and stop people from splintering off is to look at everyone. So if someone raises their hand and asks a question, and then you have to answer that question, look at that guy, answer the question a little bit, but then move your eyes around the classroom or in the group to everyone in the group and give them eye contact. And that immediately makes them obliged to listen to you more because it feels like you and them are there instead of them literally just zoning out and watching it as if it was like a YouTube video. Let's say you're in a group of friends and you're speaking, you sense that people are drifting off a little bit, just look at them. When you're answering a question to someone, when you're talking to someone, look at the others in the group, and they'll be obliged to join in. Now, that said, all of these tips are very, very helpful. And if you do all of these tips, I guarantee you will feel a change in your life. You will get more people to listen to you. But I want to direct you to something that may be more impactful. I want to direct you to something that is a deeper issue in all of us, in most people. And if you can fix this one thing, your charisma will skyrocket like that, as it has done to mine. Your social anxiety, your self-criticism, your self-doubt, all of that kind of just goes out the window. Because think about it. What fundamentally is happening when people don't listen to you? What's happening inside your body? You're feeling disrespected, aren't you? You're feeling like an outcast, you're feeling rejected. And then that goes into your head to produce a much more, like thousands of thoughts that you're worthless. What did you do wrong? What did you say? Why did this happen to me? And maybe you start to feel like shit. You start to feel a little bit bitter and you become less sociable throughout the day when something bad happens to you, socially wise, right? And so what if I told you you can get rid of that, to change the way you think, and so that changes the way you feel? And to simplify what that means for you, instead of speaking in this mystical, philosophical language, picture yourself in a car and imagine there's a reckless driver on the motorway and he's putting everyone in danger in your car. And you start to get angry, right? But then what if you change the reckless driver into someone who's rushing to hospital to save his wife, or maybe to bring his wife to hospital to give birth? Then you'd immediately get that anger turning into sympathy, wouldn't you? And so by changing the way you perceive things, changing your thoughts about things, you can change the way you feel. And so imagine changing your thoughts in a negative situation, or changing your thoughts in an awkward situation where you're lining up outside the class, or maybe you're on a table full of people you don't know, changing your thoughts into good ones and feeling charismatic in an awkward situation. Then you can conquer that awkward situation. If that sounds interesting to you, check out the video that's on the screen right now. See you there.